Okay, guys, today, very special guest, Christian Catalini, somebody who I've seen for quite some time now, originally working in payments, Bitcoin scaling, worked at Lightspark, which many people will know, and is somebody who has really, I would say, is like quite on the frontier of AI now. So, Christian, welcome. Thanks for coming on, and let's get a little bit of background first before we kind of go into our deep dive, first full-blown AI episode, perhaps.
Great to be here. Again, crazy journey. Started in academia, stumbled on Bitcoin when we did the Bitcoin experiment at MIT. This was back in 2013. We gave away, at the time, about $500,000 in Bitcoin to all of the MIT undergrads. What got me really excited about all of this was like, okay, here's technology that's going to really expand access to financial services, to who can borrow money, who can invest, all the wonderful things that I think drawn a lot of people into crypto. From there, the first few years was kind of wild. Most academics around me thought it was really crazy to think about crypto as a legitimate, research topic. But that's what kind of landed me into what I thought would be a research meeting at Facebook at the time. David Marcus, who eventually, became my co-founder in the Libra journey and also in Lightspark, was still a messenger and assembling what became the team. The infamous team behind Libra. So we did all of that together with a bunch of really great people. Got beaten up by regulators pretty much in every jurisdiction across the globe. And then licking our wounds and our scars on kind of some of the lessons of Libra, we came together as Lightspark. Probably overcorrecting on this thesis that stablecoins are never going to work. They just assign too much power to a single player. And so we had to go back to the roots, to Bitcoin, build on Lightning and all of that. And then as of February, decided to, take a break, think about what's worth building next. Definitely spend a lot of cycles on AI. To me, that is the tsunami that, we should all be thinking more about. Lots of opportunities, lots of challenges ahead, but also an exciting time to really think about, what's possible. So that's kind of the phase I'm in.
Yeah, and that was like a very good, concise overview. I think sometimes you get people who just like start going off on tangents. I thought like it's very well structured. Okay, so I want to we'll come back to I guess we'll come back to all this because I want to talk about Libra, and especially in the context of what we're seeing now. So we'll talk about this in a bit, and then also I'll come back to the Lightning stuff. But let's like jump into the AI stuff because this is mainly what I see you posting about as of late. What are you doing with AI? Like, maybe just an easiest like layup question. Like, what are you doing with AI? And I'll probe more.
Yeah, I would say the obsession started about a year and a half ago. We wrote a short piece where we were essentially trying to figure out, this was over the holiday break. We were trying to figure out with a couple of others, what's still defensible, what's still human, what should we all be doing? So that first piece had a very simple idea. The conclusion we came to was, if something can be measured, it's gone, right? So you should just accept that the moment the machines have enough data on any topic, any task, any job to be done, don't bother, right? Compute will solve for that. That was our first attempt. And then when I had more time, going kind of part-time on my startup, Lightspark, we ended up pushing a paper that's a lot more ambitious, trying to really carve out what does the future look like. It was a cathartic exercise. I did the same when I got passionate about crypto and blockchain. We wrote a simple economics of the blockchain way back. And that piece, looking back, got a lot of things right. So I was like, can we do the same for AI? Can we do the same for kind of near AGI or whatever is on the horizon, 12, 18 months from now? And that was kind of my journey into like looking more at the tools, looking more at the tech, understanding where will value accrue. Is it all kind of absorbed like a black hole by the foundational labs, or is there a chance for anyone else building outside of the foundational labs to still build something valuable for the future? It felt like, maybe this is our last shot before the economy looks very different, and definitely jobs will be a lot more fluid going on. That's the journey I'm still on. I thought that by having more time, I would be able to be on the frontier of AI. It turns out that the closer you get to it, the more you see how rapidly it's moving in every possible direction. It's kind of really a mixed feeling of like on one side, probably the most exciting time to think about starting something from scratch. On the other side, probably the most challenging one because your landscape is shifting. I mean, startups always have this problem where everything changes all the time and you need to be very responsive to the environment. I love looking back on when we were building in crypto winter. It was quiet. You could focus on actually delivering your value. But now, everything changes with one blog post by Anthropic or anyone else.
Yeah. So, okay, then like, give me a little bit of, I think it's interesting. You said you wrote this paper quite some time ago as like where the value would accrue. So what was sort of the conclusions, or I suppose it's a work in progress. Seems like you're still on this journey, but what were some of the conclusions you came to? And also, I won't say explain like I'm five, but closer to explaining like I'm five than explaining like I myself am on the bleeding edge, if that makes sense. Like just with regards to this kind of value accrual and like where you, I don't know, maybe some of your conclusions with or similarities with the application layer versus sort of like the foundational model layer.
Yeah, so let me start with the punchline. I don't think people have really digested where this is all going, especially for the foundational labs. My sense is the market will split. And so if you have state-of-the-art models, you'll be like selling iPhones. You're at the top of the market. You'll be having a nice markup potentially. This will work really well for you, say, if you're in pharma or fields where it can be, you can get IP or patents or any sort of protection around where you get. And so being a little bit early provides a lot of value. Cyber is probably another good example where, of course, people will always pay for frontier capabilities, especially on the defense side. But we're seeing this already play out. Everything else, what's Android here? Android is, all the open source models, everyone that's able to distill, find traces, catch up with the frontier models fairly rapidly, and a broadening coalition of companies, including, Satya from Microsoft wrote a very long post on this. It's existential for many companies, right? They don't want to become a feature to the foundational labs. And so they're starting to think through, how do we really embrace something very different? The latest one was Karp from Palantir, really talking about owning kind of your own intelligence, a more sovereign version of it. I think that's a really interesting trend. And to be honest, going back to the insight of the paper, what's the core insight? What's still defensible? Well, if you believe that everything that can be measured will be automated, then one path to having an advantage is, well, you're measuring something that nobody else's does. So you have some sort of like...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, I think I just thought of this when you were talking about like pharma or defense. Like I think especially the IP and like the data that like pharmaceutical, like early, or large pharmaceutical companies have is like quite different than what is out there like in the public domain. So sorry,
in general, right? So maybe it's like the Bloomberg data feed. You essentially have some exclusive rights or some early access to something that nobody else has. You can train your model on it. You can get better at it. That's going to be a very sustainable moat, I think, for the near future. The second one, and this relates to all of us, is like what's still not, captured by AI. Well, think about, I love to call these the weights of your own brain, right? So models have weights, but of course, each one of us from when we're born to all the experiences, all the career things that we see, those shape us. Those shape, when presented with new evidence, with new information, how we think about the future. And those are still yours. Those haven't been tracked and digitized and fed into a model yet. Of course, if you look at Cloud Cowork, computer use like Codex, all of these toolkits are essentially getting closer to capturing your own digital behaviors and actions and decisions. So they're becoming more dangerous in terms of substitution. But for now, the weights in your brain are IP. They're something that you can scale and protect. And in the paper, one of the key conclusions is that if intelligence is really becoming cheap, commodified, you can get it on tap at different levels, right? So is it Fable level? Is it Mythos level? Is it, something cheaper like GLM 5.2? If that's true, and we can now deploy intelligence at scale, then there's going to be a new bottleneck. And I think people in crypto should be excited about this because that bottleneck turns out to be verification. What is verification? We have a very narrow definition of this, a very precise one. Part of writing this paper was a response to all these vague terms that people keep floating. Oh, don't worry about AI as long as you have agency. Don't worry about AI as long as you have taste or curation or judgment. all these things are vague, right? What's judgment today? I mean, I'm sure that things that Mythos and Fable can do, we would have thought of them as judgment even as 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So verification for us is the act of, again, applying the weights of your brain and deciding, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this up to par? So every time you go into that turn-to-turn conversation with Claude Code or your favorite LLM, you're essentially doing verification. Now, people think of this a lot more formally in AI, evals, feedback loops, all the stuff that everyone is talking about. You should really own. That's verification. And the reason why, although the paper is an AI paper, of course, having spent more than a decade in crypto, I haven't abandoned the field yet, as some have, is that I do think we've actually seeded all the right primitives. And this is a recurring problem with crypto where people have all the right ideas. And then because of tokens, because of, all sort of distractions, we don't execute on them all. I do think a lot of the primitives that crypto has, from identity to provenance and digital traces, is going to come back. It's going to be quite important. Here's a simple one, right? We're all excited, I think, about open source models. I think they have a really important role to play in counterbalancing, a lot of the concentration in the big foundational labs. But how do you know, right? If you're running a Chinese model, that there's no backdoor, it's not going to be biased. It's going to not do nefarious things, when triggered with a special keyword. We will need essentially end-to-end verifiable models. I do think crypto can play a role in it. There's some teams exploring that. Super early stages, but people will want more than just verifiable inference. They want to know that, from the source data to the way the model behaves, especially in regulated financial services or healthcare or sensitive fields, you will want to know a lot more. And so, again, I think we're going to see potentially some crypto founders come back and build almost like the tools that mitigate some of the countereffects of AI. So I'm excited for that. I think it's super early.
When you talk verification, I mean, I think my brain goes to some type of ZK. I don't know. I mean, that's certainly one that's been pushed. I guess my question is there value in this? And I mean, is there startup value? Is there venture value insofar as are these, okay, let me go back. I had this group chat and a lot of our skepticism early around the economics behind, for example, generating ZK proofs is Amazon can generate ZK proofs. Now, this is also a default answer to everything in the startup world, right? Which is, why does
everything
Amazon
in
do
crypto
it?
rails,
exactly.
right? It's
Exactly. Or outside of it as well, just in finance and economics, why doesn't your competitor just do that? So it's not, and I've had to tame that to some extent, to be honest, because I came originally through the understanding of a lot of things through crypto, and my default assumption was, well, they're just going to fork it, right? So I had that in my brain, and I think I've had to come closer to okay, there is value to be created elsewhere. When it comes to this verification idea, though, and I understand I think the general premise, is there a business to be had there? Is there value for startups to come back and create something whereby they can, verify the data set is correct, verify the model weights are correct. You can run the source code from, run it from source. Is this something that engenders capitalism, if you will?
I mean, as usual, that's the long-standing question about all layer ones and twos, in this whole space. I mean, as we've seen, I would say the app level can be a profitable space for eventual monetization, and the protocol layer ends up being much more of a public utility of sorts. So as always, it's going to be contested. I do think that the best teams, very much like we've seen also in payments and stablecoins, will be able to execute fairly well on it. But you raise an important point, right? Does this need kind of crypto as decentralized infrastructure, or does this need crypto as just good cryptography and proofs? I think it's going to be a mix of both. To be honest, the part to be bearish on, and I'm sure we're going to talk about agentic commerce and all of that, is that the reality is that in crypto for a long time, we've always assumed that there was a right way to build things, and we kind of ignored where the gravity pulls in some of these things. I think you're seeing it in payments where a lot of the, full interoperability, fully permissionless, neutral network plot didn't really play out. I mean, one of the reasons for going back to Bitcoin after Libra was it was very clear to us that if the incumbents did not want payments to become better or did not want to share the rents, then anything that had a kind of a single throat to choke, like a stablecoin issuer, would be never able to do that. Now, I think we're in a very different environment, and what's great is that it played out in a way where maybe we're going to have many different issuers and many competing rails and networks. So that mega Libra type playbook is not going to kind of pan out. But that said, I do think in AI is even stronger, where so far we have not seen a reason for decentralized distributed inference or training even to exist. Maybe Fable ban or instances where some of these things get more restricted will cause almost like a rebel alliance, as USB has labeled it. I think the problem with some of these rebel alliances in crypto, think about the old trend on, oh, we need to reinvent social media. People care about privacy. People want to own their data. We kind of seen that plot before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's basically been like, at least thus far, is like kind of my read as well, especially with regards like not really, no one has like massive demand for decentralized, training and like all these different sort of ideas that are coming into fruition. Let me ask you this. One of the naturally, right, like crypto people trying to make analogs, one of the common refrains is that we kind of see the protocol layer in crypto similarly to the foundation model in AI. I think it's a reasonable, like at a very high level, it seems reasonable. That said, there are very clear moats and barriers to entry, like obviously compute and just the massive cost and money that's being thrown at compute. But more than that, I mean, you can just look and see the contracts that Anthropic has with the U.S. government and OpenAI has with the U.S. government, and the fact that they charge people $10 a month or more, right? Like, right. So it's very clear that there's more of a defensible moat now. Now, like if the model weights obviously are completely open source, then that changes. But I guess how good do you think this? How good of a comp do you think this is, or where do you think it kind of falls flat?
Look, it's a fun comp to entertain, especially for people in crypto recovering from maybe more than a decade of false starts and kind of missed opportunities on some of this. I don't think the mapping is that great. Again, the reason why I think the foundation models are still going to get challenged is actually more subtle, which is maybe it relates to the idea of forking, but look, distilling traces, everything that kind of inevitably leaves the lab, even through talent, right? We've seen talent move between labs all the time.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible, I think, to keep that a secret sauce. So it's not going to be like the Coca-Cola recipe, right. Which means that you have this short window of monetizing state of the art. Again, maybe the top end of the market. So the Android iPhone, I think, is actually a better analogy. Companies are going to try to be ruthless about cost. The part that I do think resonates with crypto is I think companies are also starting to care more about control. That's the part I'm personally excited. I mean, does intelligence really want to be free? Will society almost allow one of these foundational labs to gobble it all up, even if they start vertically integrating with fintech or other vertical? I think that's a natural trend for them. Eventually, they'll acquire law firms so that they can get access to some of the historical lessons and data, an insurance firm, and so on. The problem with that story is that I don't think it incorporates the response and the reaction. You've already seen it. Microsoft, which used to be a lot more foundational lab friendly, also because it needed to, is now playing a completely different game of saying, hey, don't worry, we will bring intelligence to you. It will be yours. When you look at OpenClaw, Hermes, people are starting to build their own harnesses and tinkering with all of this, because I do feel like they do have a sense that they're going to get distilled. And so if companies don't want to get distilled, if individuals don't want to get distilled, then I do think that maybe it's not going to be a rebel alliances, but you're starting to hear more loud voices. I mean, I was surprised to hear Palantir, right, come out in favor of sovereignty of AI models. Makes sense when you think about their business model. There's probably a lot more Microsoft and Palantirs out there that will not want to just concede, to Anthropic and OpenAI. So again, very, very interesting times, very different than crypto. I think here the revenues are real. The demand is very real. If anything, it's much more of a CFO problem of like, how do you time perfectly? Your SOTA period expires really rapidly. You need to fund the next wave. You need to get the best infrastructure. My bet would be actually, if you look at how Elon has been outplaying everybody by advancing compute first and now renting it out, maybe even sending it to space, that's a real bottleneck, right? So being able to scale inference, we're going to need a ton of inference. Whoever has access to the hardware, I think, is going to have an advantage. We have none of that in crypto. So that's where I think, it all breaks down pretty fast.
Let me take a moment to talk to you about Ellipsis Labs, a team I've known for a while. The Ellipsis team is one of the few that I can consistently point to and say, these guys really know what they're doing. Ellipsis Labs brought capital-efficient order books to Solana and started the Prop AMM revolution with SolFi. Altogether, they've saved retail traders tens of millions of dollars by reducing slippage on spot markets. They're bringing the same level of expertise to perpetuals with Phoenix, which is live today. Ellipsis Labs is backed by Paradigm, Electric Capital, and Han Ventures. I would consider them the foremost experts in crypto market microstructure. The best part is that Ellipsis Labs is hiring for New York-based engineers. Work with a small, focused team who are results-driven, collaborative, and use a modern stack. If you're an engineer looking to work with a DeFi team that's already proven itself in the market, go to ellipsislabs.com/careers. Have you played around, just out of curiosity, have you played around with this new NVIDIA thing? Like, what is it called?
Yeah. So the DJX and all the different devices, you mean for?
No. Like NVIDIA has their own like open source model now. I don't know what it's called.
NVIDIA cultivates a number of open source models, even word models, right? So those are the ones that you need for robotics and such. Okay. It's a smart play, right? So what I think is interesting about NVIDIA is that, if you see now the laptop, the kind of $5,000 device, it seems to imply that we will be running some meaningful inference locally or on our devices. I mean, at the end, if you have a MacBook, you're already, invested in infrastructure that can run decent AI or will run decent AI. My guess, and this is where a lot of the orchestration business is quite interesting, if you think about Open Router and some of the others trying, people will send their flows between something local, something in the cloud, and open source, and then something, of course, state of the art, because you'll need it for the hardest problems. Yeah, I think like if crypto has taught us anything, it's that this assumption that people will run their own hardware unless it is absolutely necessary and there is no other way to do it, is sort of a lesson in ideology that never really comes through. So I think that, it is also interesting seeing like consumer hardware prices just skyrocket. And I'm sure there is quite a lot of demand, but at the same time, it definitely seems like a lot of this will end up in the cloud in the same way that a lot of crypto ended up in the cloud, and a lot of, just tech before that, data before that ended up in the cloud. I think it really bounces back and forth, right? To some extent, if we have decent hardware, should it do some of the heavy lifting? Will someone probably put together a network of all these different devices to do something useful? Yeah, I mean, they're sitting idle, right? It's like the Uber Black example of the cars idling at the airport. Should we use it? Yes. Maybe Apple will figure out a way to help you use it, or Tesla or Google, right? So it may not play out in the fully decentralized scenario. I do think it's interesting that people feel to want ownership, at least early adopters. Reminds me a lot of the Homebrew Computer Club, when you see the pictures of Wozniak or Gates or Jobs, all these people tinkering with the early PCs and alike. When people build their own OpenClaw, there's something inspiring about it. Yeah. Will it ever be commercial? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like the not your key is not your coins, or run a node. If you're not running a node, you're not
non-custodial intelligence. Yeah,
right, exactly. Validating chain. Okay, the last thing before we move off the subject of AI or move on to other stuff, I want to ask you, like, just, and this is, you can run any direction with this, like, how do you feel about the like LLMs in general? Like, do you think that LLMs are, I don't know, I'm asking this in a very naive way, but is this the future of AI? Or are you interested in other architectures? Like, what else do you see? I don't know, neural network stuff. Like, is there anything else where there seems to be rapid gains for the time being?
Yeah, I would say, look, LLMs clearly keep surprising us. So anyone that's betting against scaling laws seem to get it wrong at this point. There's also a lot of proprietary data that I don't think they've seen, right? So how much better can they get? I think the Bridgewater example is a really good one. It's actually very much aligned with the predictions of our paper, which is like, if you can bring expert judgment into any domain and combine it with some of these open source models, you can go way further than even the frontier models, because you just get really good at certain tasks. So I think we're going to see a ton of that. We're going to see a lot more collaborations between some of the labs, or even companies realizing, okay, I have deep expertise in X. I can take an open source model, add my own expertise and get a lot of gains out of it. But that's kind of a part of the equation. I think the other big piece, which is at this point well known is word models. So if you look at what Word Labs by Fei Li is doing, or AMI and others, what's exciting about word models, and we talk about it in the paper, is that in a sense the limit of LLMs is they can only recombine ideas that they've seen.
Right.
And so as magical as they are, and by the way, I think they can be very creative, very innovative, they're essentially recombining points on a landscape that's been presented and fed to them. Now, the skeptics say that's not innovative. Well, I would challenge you. Most innovation is just recombination of ideas. If someone has seen something in payments, they've seen something in crypto, they smash it together. There's a lot of that. And so there's going to be a lot of invention that comes from LLMs. But I think where word models get a lot more interesting is that one of the features that I don't think these models today can do is our brains do a lot of counterfactual thinking. You see a new situation, something shifts in the market, we're all reacting to it with our own weights, and we're running essentially thousands of what if scenarios and counterfactuals. Now, word models tend to be really, really good at that, especially one grounded in physics. They can think through all sorts of scenarios, and of course, the early applications are robotics, navigation, all the usual stuff. I think eventually we're going to have really thoughtful word models also for markets, social systems. So when that happens, I think that's going to be a whole different experience of intelligence. Many argue that we're grounded in reality. We have all sort of sensors from when we're born, and so we haven't created that yet at scale. So I would say that's probably the next area to be excited about.
Interesting. Okay. All right. I want to talk to you now about your time at Libra. Like, give me a rundown of my understanding always, and I think is at least partially true, is that a lot of the headwinds with Libra were regulatory. But for people who may not know, like, what was the original idea? I know that like Zuck himself was involved in very much, thinking that this was the future of finance, in fact. So talk to me a bit about Libra, and then, because it's a really good transition into like a lot of your thoughts on stablecoins today.
Yeah, I would say, look, the public narrative has always been the one shaped by the media headlines, which was like, okay, Libra was a wreck in terms of regulatory interactions. That's true for, I would say, Libra version 1. It was absolutely not true when we folded. So by the end of the journey, I was actually working with Stuart Levy, who used to be at Treasury and HSBC, had put together a team of like seasoned ex-bankers to really pursue what was a payment system license application. So think of it as, pretty much, state of the art from a payments perspective. We had great regulatory relations. We were meeting regularly with the Fed and others. The project was greenlighted by Powell. Then, of course, there was political interference. The story is known. Janet Yellen told them this would be career suicide. And there was definitely pressure from incumbents. So I would say what killed Libra in the end was not the regulatory piece. It was, the interaction between lobbying and regulatory. And so Libra was a very uncomfortable project for some of the incumbents. Just think about how much of revenues payments are for many of these players. So it was existential. Now, that said, we did countless errors, and so we made it extremely easy for the incumbents to kill us. You could have imagined an alternative universe, which some of us were advocating for, which is like, okay, launch a small remittance cross-border app for sending money. Sure, based on crypto rails, maybe use one of the networks that at scale. Don't go out with a big bang. Don't try to reinvent money. In that universe, I think probably would have been able to create more value before we were shut down. And the moment you say we're not going to launch without all the regulatory approvals, you essentially cornered yourself. We first tried in Switzerland. The license was ready to be signed by the Swiss regulator, and the US kind of interfered. Then we went through the process in the US with the Fed. Also didn't work out. We actually had one last attempt that's less publicly known with New York DFS. Then, Cuomo got indicted. Everything kind of fell apart over there. But I think we were early. We made a lot of mistakes. Maybe, thinking about some of the efforts today in creating open standards, right? We were kind of ahead of thinking through distributed governance. I don't think we ever got credit for that because everybody thought, okay, this is a Facebook project. They have some evil intention of having everybody's bank accounts across the globe. That was not the point. I mean, the point was really to make an open standard work, make an open network available to everybody. And then, of course, Facebook, like many others, would have had a wallet and competed. But it was a lot more distributed and decentralized than people gave it credit for, I would say.
As a result of that, you like Libra sort of dissolved, and you went on to start Lightspark. And yeah, talk to me about I know David Marcus' son. So I follow Lightspark off and on. What was the original idea? It was primarily predicated on Lightning.
Yeah, to understand Lightspark, you have to understand kind of the biggest cars from Libra, right? One was like, okay, if there's a single throat to choke, it will be, it will be taken out. And if you want to reinvent payments, first of all, you need to do it in a way that's a lot more open. And second, it's not about the tech. I would say one of the many mistakes of Libra was like believing, oh, if we build the state-of-the-art blockchain, that's going to solve all of our problems, right? And I would say Libra BFT at the end was state of the art on some dimensions, and many of the Libra children, from Aptos and Sui, really benefited from that open source code base. Yeah. We actually had a completely different take, maybe because David, me, and some of the others that founded Lightspark were kind of front of the line with regulators. We had experienced firsthand and maybe overcorrected just how difficult it is to scale something when you need to be the architect of the network. So we looked around and we concluded we're not going to touch the open source code base of Libra. It's a great code base, but this is not about the tech. We need to build where the governance is right. That led us to Bitcoin. And, the sudden realization a second after where you say, okay, it has to be Bitcoin is like, well, there's no tech to do this. Lightning was a toy. It was promising, but there were two big problems. One was like making it sound and enterprise grade, which it wasn't. It was really clunky. It would break all the time. You couldn't send $50 without it, never making it to the other side. And the second one was economics. So, I'm an economist, so I looked at Lightning and was like, this is the most capital inefficient thing on the planet. We're going to lock all this Bitcoin liquidity that's super pressure and very volatile and going to try to make it a payment network. Anyway, so that was actually my foray into AI. We built this product called Lightspark Predict, which was essentially trying to make capital really efficient, route payments through, make Lightning actually feel more like a payment network. That's where I got really excited about, where this was all going. And we signed up Coinbase, other large customers that wanted to use Lightning, but it was always niche, definitely super niche. And the iteration from there then was, okay, what if we connect fintechs and neobanks? Our plan was always like, start with the crypto exchanges and wallets, then move to neobanks and fintechs, and then eventually back to platforms like in Libra. And in that phase, we developed this open standard called UMA, very difficult to integrate, a lot of, complexity to it. Eventually, all of this got simplified. And so with Grid, Lightspark is now pursuing almost like if you think about what Bridge and BVNK and Paxos and many of these players are doing within their kind of offering, we're doing it on an open network. So it's still based on Bitcoin, Spark being kind of an evolution of Lightning that allows you to do a few things better, including stables. The company had to kind of walk back on the idea that it's always going to be Bitcoin as a settlement asset. It was obvious to us, 2 years in, that stablecoins were actually happening. So we had to kind of recorrect. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting time to think about all of this because on one side, we were kind of shaped by the idea that it had to be an open protocol and that banks will not want to participate. Large institutions and fintechs will not want to touch anything that, at a central actor. But then you look at where the space is going and you have Tempo one side, Arc, Canton, like all of these efforts are essentially to crypto natives, I think, kind of surprising and definitely less decentralized than Libra was even. And I get it. I mean, Libra always had it's a Facebook project thing, but we had like 26 members. Each one had a vote. I was in every one of those voting sessions. We had no clue how they would go. There was a lot of like decentralized governance, a lot of tension. And, we had like the two card networks, we had two telcos, we had like everyone. And there was a lot of debates, which is why, things like open standard, I think are going to have a long, long way to go if they want to be like Libra.
Before we dive more into stablecoins, I want to ask you just a broader question regarding Bitcoin. So I think I understood, or at least I read early on, the premise behind Lightspark, and I had followed David from not quite at Libra, but obviously shortly thereafter. One of the ideas that I think has been challenged, and you kind of alluded to this, but I'm going to actually extend this to just Bitcoin maybe in general. With regards to scaling Bitcoin, it seems fairly clear, at least for the time being, okay, and there's going to be a lot of people screeching about this, but for the time being, the way we have scaled is very, very much in a centralized way, and to the point where, so I'm being extremely broad in what I'm saying here, but between IBIT and strategy and holding custodial Bitcoin,
I have strong opinions
exchanges,
on the digital asset companies.
right?
So if you want to talk,
Well, maybe just in terms of people, I think there was obviously early on, like with the original, like Strija, Poon, whatever paper, right? Like there was this idea that we had to scale this network. And I think that it's becoming less clear to me that is very obvious. I couldn't tell you whether there will be tremendous demand to use. Well, okay, so let me go back. Obviously, you know that early on, like the idea behind Lightning was like a high velocity payments network, right? And that was something that Bitcoin clearly did not have. And of course, there's all these like liquidity problems you talk about, and like the routing is very weird, and it's something that seems like it should be fairly simple, like in terms of understanding a routing network. And then everybody who's ever worked on it says it's the most complicated thing in the world. So I default to them in terms of understanding. Yeah, exactly. But I think just more broadly, I think the question to me now is like, what are we scaling Bitcoin for, right? And as much as the ideologue in me wants to believe in like a money that is used in daily, well, I don't know, maybe not daily, but just more integrated in the financial system in more trustless ways, the demand there is just still not there. It's still like 10, 15 years later, is still not there. So I wonder about the premise to begin with. And like, I have a lot of friends who are working on, I mean, you know, David Marcus, his son, Alex from ARC, like all of these people. And yeah, I still kind of question the premise, like to what end? Like it's not clear the demand is there versus using wrap BTC or just borrowing against your IBIT account, right? Like you can get margin loans that are very similar to.
I hear you.
So I wonder just your thoughts. This is a long diatribe, but like, does Bitcoin scaling matter, or at the very least, is it going to matter in the short to medium term?
Look, it really depends what the community does. Unfortunately, it's always been hostile to, okay, we have demand for use cases that maybe are not as core or novel, and we're not going to meet it. But if it stays part of the course, look, Spark is trust minimized, and it's the best you can do given the constraints without a decent opcode. I don't think it would take much to make things like Spark or Arc and others like fully trustless and really great. But so far, you know, the core developers don't seem to care. And I think the part that they don't incorporate when that doesn't happen and when Bitcoin doesn't become a little bit more flexible. Now, there's a lot of value in being the boring, you know, slowly moving protocol and all of this. It's required for being sound money and being kind of the network that everybody goes to when things kind of really go wrong. But, you know, if you look at the end state for the current track is, well, most Bitcoin is custody with a custodian. ETFs is where all the engagement and activities around Bitcoin. And there's no neutral grassroots, you know, Bitcoin protocol. At the end, you know, Bitcoin was always meant to be, you know, the protocol for money. Even in Satoshi's vision, I don't think that happens without an opcode. Now, look, if you look at things like Spark, to the Bitcoin purist, it's like, oh, why isn't it, you know, as trustless as the most trustless thing possible? Well, because, you know, you're trying to do payments, you're trying to do stablecoins, you're trying to make it actually work with low fees so that you can compete with, I think, much worse alternative outside of Bitcoin. That the community has to wake up. I think Bitcoin can be very relevant beyond just being this weird new digital asset that people, you know, hold some value in. It needs infrastructure. And that's been kind of the challenge in scaling Lightspark, which is like, we were strong Bitcoin advocates through and through. But if you don't get a new opcode, and there's been many different proposals that I think would fit the needs for many players, it's going to be marginal, right? And we're going to land on much worse solutions. So I feel like sometimes Bitcoin development tends to live in a bubble, which is like, oh, we're just Bitcoin. We don't care about the alternatives. Fintechs care about the alternatives. Banks care about the alternatives. I mean, one of the interesting things is that Lightning, ironically, is great for correspondent banking, right? So when we talk to very large institutions, they do see the value in a neutral protocol. They do see the value in like not tying themselves to, you know, a Stripe or a Circle. I think that's going to come back. But honestly, EVM is a better toolkit for a lot of this. And so that's kind of a challenge, or even Solana or some of these other ecosystems.
But when you say they do see value in a neutral network, like this is a good, I think, segue into the OUSD. I mean, at what point is a neutral network neutral enough, right? Like there's a lot of attempts at this now between Tempo, this like consortium, and now the OUSD idea that's sort of being integrated with it, ARC. You mentioned Canton. Like, what is the neutrality to them? I think this is an idea that crypto people have had for quite some time, that, institutions value neutrality. And let me say this. It's certainly not the neutrality that, I don't know, the cypherpunks originally
for sure
believed in, right?
It's gradients,
so then,
yes.
Yeah, it's a gradient, but it's also like, I mean, there's some threshold on this gradient where it's kind of like, okay, wait, we might as well be talking about, single sequencer databases. Like it's functionally the same. And I see that cropping up in most, probably most of these now. So I am curious, like, where do you think the neutrality aspect falls? Like, and maybe then you can talk about your recent discussion about OUSD, which I thought was really interesting. Quite a long thread.
Yeah, look, it's going to be a continuum on, fully neutral to fully centralized. And the challenge is really that when you think about some of the things that we care about deeply in crypto, like interoperability and base layer neutrality, they tend to be visible and tangible when things go really wrong. And in payments, I don't think we've seen that yet, right? Because for now, everybody's expanding, the pie is expanding. It's mostly about stealing business from the traditional players and porting it over. But there's going to be a moment in time where someone is going to wake up and say, "Oh wow, this infrastructure provider that I thought was neutral or neutral-ish, now we have a conflict." Countless example in the history of technology, right? The classic Zynga one. There's many of these where you get rugged by the platform provider. If you don't get to credible neutrality before that moment, I think you're in for trouble. And so, for some of these, it's so obvious, right? I think that's why, when Circle tries to sell ARC, I'm sure many financial institutions know exactly where this is going, or payment providers. If you're a payments PSP, right, and Circle approaches you with CPN and ARC, I mean, you see the writing on the wall, right? Price discovery, routing, FX, on and off ramps. Circle has to move further down. With Tempo, I think that was my open question, right? When Tempo was announced, I was like, okay, where's the neutrality? Stripe is a really strong anchor partner, very much like Facebook was to Libra. But we did a lot of motions to really decentralize this out really quickly, at least in terms of governance, right? It wasn't decentralized in permissionless, but it was at least, one vote, one member. That's the challenge for OpenUSD. When I saw it, I got excited, right? So would this space benefit from avoiding a proliferation, of dozens and dozens of stables that all do the same thing and kind of recreate store balances across organizations? Of course, right? Clearing houses, I think, can solve part of the problem, but do we really want a universe where every token is branded? Maybe not. More important than even the token, who's going to set shared standards? Think about settlement finality, any sort of merchant flows. Yeah. You want there to be agreement, compliance, travel rule. All these things should be almost like a Linux foundation for money. We need that. Now, can Open Standard be that? I think they need strong independent leadership right now. It cannot be just staffed by Stripe or Bridge people. It needs to be, much more broadly represented. There's, of course, the founding members that have governance and discretion. Some of those, of course, have conflicting business models with this actually working out. So it's going to be quite interesting to see. We had the same with Libra. We had the card companies in the mix. We had Stripe. We had Shopify. We had the Uber and Lyft, the telcos with Vodafone. It was very obvious to us in all of those conversations that every time you define a standard, there's going to be tension, right? There's going to be winners and losers. And if you're a card network, you will not want the standard to go and encroach with your core business right away. How does Open Standard solve for that? I don't know, right? So I think that's the big open question on them. I think the world would benefit from Open Standard existing. The fact that, look, if I'm a large distributor of a coin, I should earn some of the upside. I should have the yield. I should have revenues, whatever is coming from it. But the path is going to be very hard for them.
Okay, let me ask a more, I want to hear your thoughts on a more maybe, I don't want to say cynical, but it's along the lines of cynical question regarding stablecoins. And I have some, I don't know, evidence. It's biased evidence, but I have some evidence to support this kind of general direction that I'm thinking. A lot of what I'm seeing and why I'm finding it very difficult to kind of parse crypto, at the very least from an investment perspective right now, but maybe just crypto more broadly, is that what I think is happening is that there are a lot of primitives, a lot of ideas that have shown product market fit, on chain or initially through crypto rails. A very good example is prediction markets. And what's happening in my eyes is that everyone's talking about the world coming on chain, and I'm almost looking at the world moving off chain, where once something reaches escape velocity on chain,
it's in an app.
It just becomes regulated. It just becomes legalized. I mean, prediction markets Polymarket before that there was Augur, and there were some centralized versions like Predict It and stuff. But like in terms of really reaching escape velocity, escaping crypto containment, Polymarket really did that. And I would say with the last election, that was like the aha moment, right? For prediction markets. And it did show something very unique, which was that, and this is like, trite at this point, but when money is behind an idea or an outcome, it tends to have a better predictive quality, if you will. So another example is perps, right? Like I think perps have been in crypto now for quite some time.
DYDX, I mean, it was the only way to do it, right, in crypto, because it had to be perpetual and 24/7.
And now we see Kaushi's launched a perps product. Every single traditional player is trying to figure out how to either align with a current crypto product or launch their own version of perps. Everyone is lobbying the CFTC. The current CFTC guy is like clearly a perps and prediction markets, I would say, shill, but I think he's open to these ideas. Going back to my broader question here.
I see where you're going with this.
Well, also, but I want to ask. Okay, so then I did have a point. I was just starting getting in the zone. Okay, with regards to stablecoins, what I see with stablecoins is that they have given bank accounts to everyone in the world. At a practical level, they have given
for now, right? So that's the regulatory arbitrage window, which is shrinking over time.
So my question is like, why should we expect stablecoins to stay on chain versus just either banks, current institutions being able to openly serve clients around the world, or the stablecoins being taken off crypto rails to begin with? And I'm using something like
it makes perfect sense.
eCash, right? Like I'm not saying that's the perfect model, but like why should we expect these things? Why should stablecoins even be on tempo, right? Like I don't know. What are your thoughts on just maybe this overarching thought I have?
Look, lots of thoughts. First of all, and this is the sad part, maybe for those that got drawn to crypto for some longer term ideals. For this to go mainstream, it's gonna be domesticated. There's no other way, right? So the idea, and we saw it firsthand, right? One of the first concessions we had to do against a firing squad of regulators from all across the globe was non-custodial wallets for Libra. David, me, and many others on the team fought really, really hard to retain it. It was the one thing they would not budge on. We would have never launched, even in Switzerland, with non-custodial wallets from the get-go. Now, we had ideas on how to bring some form of like decentralized identity and kind of expand that, but it was a really clear red line. So the part that probably makes stablecoins and payments in crypto less exciting and interesting right now is it's all about enterprise sales, it's all about execution, it's all about bringing into compliance an infrastructure that isn't fully in compliance.
Right.
That's also where it becomes massive, right? Because in a sense, stablecoin may become a lot more boring, but finally, our less tech savvy friends will use them and will not even realize they're using them, right? So they'll see an account, they'll get yield, and there's going to be also really interesting machinery behind it. It's going to be a much better consumer experience. Some players will keep playing the regulatory arbitrage window, but honestly, the number of countries where you can do that is going to get narrower and narrower. That's why, even in prediction markets, you've seen it, but you're going to see it also with this whole idea like, non-custodial neobanks. Well, good luck, right? As soon as you reach scale, you're going to get the Libra treatment. So what does this all mean? I think we just have to accept that as different parts of crypto, different experiments that were incubated in a much more decentralized, non-custodial, experimental fashion become mainstream, they evolve, they become more boring, they get more regulated. Ideally, in that transition, we don't lose the baby for the bathwater. To me, the most important rule to keep is interop and neutrality whenever possible. And that's the challenge for payments, right? If we reinvent payments on a corp chain, and eventually it's essentially a sequel to the card networks, but on different infrastructure, who cares, right? It's not going to change how we compete. It's not going to help consumers. It's not going to help businesses. The fees might be low at the start. They will raise over time. And then we're going to go through another wave of decentralization. Hopefully we can avoid that. ironically, look, when I talk actually to some of the GSIBs, they're the ones that are most aware of this. Large banks realize, well, we don't want to tie ourselves to infrastructure that somebody else controls. So it's not, it's not idealistic. It's not disinterested. They just want to know that they will be able to sell their products in the most neutral way possible. I think that part of crypto has made it through. It's a really important one. I think there's massive benefits for people that don't have access to, banking or payments or even good investment options, right? So I think all of that is coming. It's just the revolution gets a lot more boring as it gets, as it gets televised.
Yeah, exactly. I still feel though, like with Bitcoin is like a shining light for me in the sense that I'm very non-technical, to be honest. I mean, especially relative to a lot of you guys. And I have, well, I mean, it's not caught up to the current block height, but I have a Bitcoin node, and I know how.
As you should.
Yeah, but then so I don't run it, and I very infrequently use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. So I'm not trying to claim some ideological, higher ground here. But what I am saying is that the people who want to do that, it's actually pretty simple. And this goes back to kind of the earlier discussion with regards to self-hosted computing and where this all plays out. The thing about Bitcoin to me is if you want all of this, you can still have it, and it does not take a degree in computer science. The rest of this stuff, I don't see. I've really lost a lot of desire for decentralization elsewhere, and especially with stable coins, it's the demand has been shown, right? There were attempts at decentralized stable coins. There have been many attempts, and does another one come along? Maybe, but
well, we wrote a paper, what was it, 12 months before Terra Luna, saying that none of that would work. Unfortunately, people didn't read it. Decentralized stablecoins are hard. It's defying the laws of physics.
Well, but what about for example, what about one that is completely over collateralized? I mean, for all intents and purposes, DAI hasn't. I mean, there's a lot of US.
Yeah, look, if you're willing to pay for it, if you're willing to pay for it, it will work on most scenarios. There's always tail scenarios, right? Think about long-term capital management. You can get very fancy on financial engineering. If the underlying rule is hard to break, at some point something is going to break it. But maybe to your more substantive point about things like Bitcoin, I think we tend to forget that in a sense, the fact that Bitcoin is this magical escape valve is still very special. And it may not be special for you and me or others, in developed worlds where we have good central banks, good institutions, governments that most of the time will do the right thing. But the fact that exists, I think it's a game changer. And so maybe it splits in two, right? So there's the domesticated part of crypto that will, keep advancing and most people will experience. And then there's the escape valve version of crypto. And by the way, I hope we also will have the escape valve version of intelligence. That's why I do think open source models are extremely important. We need more US open source models or Western open source models. They're going to be extremely, relevant when suddenly a lab has an incentive to do something that may not be in our best interest, right? How do you defend yourself from that? That escape valve, I think it's really valuable to society, even if it is not at scale. And maybe the point is it cannot be at scale because otherwise it gets squashed. But the fact that it exists to some people, to some businesses, it's always going to be really, really essential.
Yeah, I think that has long been one of the premises of crypto. And I think that I sort of personally under-indexed on that being the value proposition in the sense that the ability to opt out is maybe the biggest selling point, right? And
keeps incumbent in check too, right? Because
exactly. It keeps Bitcoin to me keeps central banks and governments in check. I mean, hopefully, I still believe in it. I'm understanding why people have lost some faith, but I still believe in that premise. But then a lot of the rest of this stuff is very much, I mean, even I use a more technical analogy of unilateral exit on L2s is at a practical level, it's net neutral. You end up likely, for example, trying to exit an L2, you'll likely end up paying a fee that is commensurate with the L1, right? But it does prevent people, or in theory,
100%.
It prevents theft, right? Because they know that you can, and same with Lightning, I'm sure you dealt with this with watchtowers and all this stuff, right? The same premise. So No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I do think that even if most of crypto gets domesticated, and by the way, stables are probably even less interesting than the broader evolution of all cash equivalents, right? So why do you need to keep money sitting in your bank account? There's much better ways to put your capital to work. I think crypto will enable a lot of that. People will get more value out of their savings. And tokenization, to be honest, everyone seems to be excited about tokenizing what's already existing. I'm a lot more excited about, can you tokenize something that would not have been viable before? That's where I think we'll see new markets, a bit like it happened with prediction markets and perps. That old wave, I think, will still coexist with, oh, there's an escape valve. There's something different. Just imagine, with the Fable ban, how much just private US companies started looking at GLN 5.2 and many others much more closely and testing it and knowing that, okay, if now I'm not Mythos tier, if I don't make it into the select few that get access to frontier intelligence, how do I compete? I think there's a strong analogy there between crypto and intelligence. It's just AI is going through the motions of the chancellor on the brink of the bailout to banks. Yeah. And it's going to happen. I think there's going to be a moment where people will look at a foundational lab and see it as a competitor, seeing it as a threat, seeing it as something that makes choices that we don't agree with, right? What's the exit to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of this. Okay, the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I kind of asked you before, but now I want to probe because I find this buzzword hilarious because I don't think very many people can define it all that well. What is your understanding of agentic payments, and what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, let me start with what I don't think is going to be agentic payments plus crypto. Look, every type of payment flow that exists today, the classic example, book me a flight and a hotel, that stuff is going the way of the incumbents or existing rails. It does not need programmability. The entry point is a foundation lab, right? And a deal between OpenAI and Stripe or Google and someone else, right? That's what's going to define the space. The car companies, everyone else has a great footing on that. So the way most people would experience agentic commerce is like the same apps that they use today, whether it's Amazon or whatever, right? That part I think is deeply uninteresting. The part where I do think agentic payments could touch on everything that's been built in crypto is actually machine to machine. When you have agents trying to source data, interact with the universe and borrow and buy and re-hypothecate, all this stuff is going to need to be a lot more modular. So things like Cloudflare trying to think through what is the new monetization of the web, Parallel. There's a few of these companies that I think are trying to think through, if all traffic is agentic, like all content will die, right? Because advertisement goes out the window. Some of the premises of the web will be challenged. We'll have to invent something. And so that's the part where I do think agentic payments will be interesting on stablecoins and tokenized assets and whatnot. I tend to think of this as almost like with self-driving, the different levels of autonomy. The problem with a lot of the crypto jargon on this is like we're thinking about, level 4, level 5. It's essentially, the agent has property rights, is building a company, it's conquering the world, and therefore needs to be decentralized and on crypto primitives. We're far from that, right? And so what is the version 1 where some degree of autonomy, some degree of being able to go and source resources in the background is really useful in a way that the labs can do it themselves with, use my tool within Claude and it's going to do it for you, right? It's going to pay the publisher. That's the interesting, I think, white space. It's super early. Most of the volume in AI plus crypto is just meme coins as usual. I mean, that's how we open every new vertical in crypto. So yeah.
Well, Christain, this has been fantastic. Where can people find you? You write long threads and then papers. So, and again, I hope everyone can tell now, you're pretty much on the bleeding edge, especially of like what I see as the real crypto times AI, right? Like the actual, crypto AI people. Where can people find you, read more about your stuff, find out about you?
I would say, talk to your favorite LLM. Maybe some of that will be surfaced, but the real best place is X. So see Catalini on X is where everything gets eventually funneled through.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much for your questions.